You're good.
Hey, welcome to Signal Fire Radio, ladies and gentlemen. I'm your host, Rob Renz. This is a show about ambitious leadership for ambitious leaders. As always, I am joined by my phenomenal co-host, Matt Mylap. Matthew, how are you today?
How are you, first of all?
I'm well. I'm so excited.
Yeah,
I'm jazzed.
We have we're oozing scarlet and gold right
I know.
in the studio.
Our guest today, Steven, you were an OG, or are the OG, I think, as far as my network is concerned.
Wow.
On military podcasters.
Okay.
Or people who were in the military that have a podcast.
Sure.
So give the people a little bit of your backstory.
Well, first of all, I want to say thank you for inviting me into the center of excellence that you have here.
Center of excellence. I like
in
that.
Wilmington and
Such a
Wilmington, North Carolina. I love this place. For those of you who have not had an opportunity to meet Rob Renz in person, you're in for a treat. So he's a lot of fun. Matt's cool too.
Matt's cool too.
Yeah,
Matt's
cool.
right.
Thanks, Evan's awesome too. Evan's
yeah.
great.
Yeah.
Let me tell you, Evan's the man.
He never, ever comes from Fayetteville anymore.
Oh, really?
We used to see him
Would
regularly.
you leave if you lived in Fayetteville?
I would daily. I would leave. Daily, I would leave. But he's in San Diego this week, I think. He's doing his big boy job.
I understand.
So it's all right.
No, it's all good. No, I appreciate the. First of all, it is an honor. People say that all the time, but it is. I love being on podcasts. I like talking with people. One, just because it's you always learn something new. Mm-hmm. Like picking up on what people are doing, what y'all are doing, seeing the evolution. I remember whenever you talked to me about your podcast, you're like, "Hey, listen to this first one," and I came up with like a series of notes and gave them back to you, and then I didn't hear back from him.
Wrong and
no, I thought it was great.
Yeah.
I actually felt like it was really good. So. What most people don't do is they're so afraid of that criticism that they don't do anything, which is what led to Knucklehead being formed, to be honest with you. I found myself really, really risk averse, and I felt like I had to clam up on my shit. Like you see Marines as soon as they get out of the military.
Which you're a Marine.
Yep, Marine, yes, absolute Marine. Bleeding and what'd you say?
Yeah.
Scarlet and
Gold.
gold.
Scarlet and
Yeah,
gold,
yeah.
baby. We're going to start calling cadence before too long.
Here we go. So what's interesting is that transition, you have to strip yourself of that identity that you were and then figure out what your strengths are going forward. And it took me a long time to do that, getting out of the military. And anyway, when it comes to podcasting, you're going to have such an in-depth conversation on a certain topic that sometimes you may dive deep into it, or sometimes you may just stay above the surface or stay up on the surface. And I hated those surface level conversations that I was having all the time with, really quite frankly, with some sales conversations, but also just interpersonal relationships conversations. So what a podcast allowed us to do was really just get to the depth of why people were doing whatever it was that they were doing. And we found that, after hearing people multiple episodes, you start to get to feel like you know that person. And so I felt like there was a business application to that. And you had asked me earlier, Matt, before we got started about what Knucklehead was all about. And I started to tell the story, and I was like, we'll probably talk about this more. So it directly answers your question.
You were trying to eat your muffin. And
yes.
I know what it's
that's
like being hungry and trying to tell a story. It sucks.
Well, okay, so Rob, you asked a question. So I was leading and building a sales team. I was a sales director for an ag tech startup down in Austin. And in today's politically, correct environment or climate, if you disagree with how folks want to be perceived, it really ruffles their feathers quite a bit. So this was right around the 2015, 2016 timeframe when Trump was really making a move, and he was, everybody counted him out, and everybody who was in the establishment was really kind of giving him a hard time about the impact that he was going to make in American politics. And everybody I worked with was a huge Hillary supporter. And it just got to a point
You're
where
in Austin, right?
Yeah. And
It's a bastion of liberal thought in the best state.
Tim Kennedy came on the podcast, and he was like, it's like the belly of the beast, like being in Austin. It's the absolute truth. He still lives there, but he lives outside of Austin. It's close to Austin, but as far away from Austin as you can get. And anyway, the amount of, tolerance that they say that they have, it actually becomes suffocating because it's not tolerant at all. You have to fall in line with in lockstep with how they think, or you're going to be ostracized. And so I remember the sales team that I was building, you need to be able to have a forward posture whenever you're in sales and mix it up with whomever is the decision maker there. But it doesn't always mean that you have to get along to go along in these inter office politics that was happening. So the director of HR was talking to one of my sales folks at the time, and it kind of pissed me off because she was reporting back to the owner of the company that some things were going on that weren't. And so when I confronted her about it, she didn't like that very much.
And how did she rank to your position?
She was a peer. She was a peer of mine. She was the director of HR. I was the director of sales. So it was my sales team. She didn't really, quite frankly, have any business doing what she was doing. But I understood what she was. I understand what she was trying to do, but she could have gone about it differently. Long story short is, I texted my wife exactly how I felt about this woman, and I gave you the backstory of us not, lining up originally. So I don't want to say what I said, but I said some pretty choice words about how I felt about her political beliefs and whatever. And it turns out I was texting her.
Oh boy.
And not my wife.
Oh boy.
Whoa.
Yeah. So I call that a knucklehead moment.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
I was going to say a Matt moment.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's the genesis of knuckleheads, because I felt like, and maybe I'm off base in saying this, but in organizations all over the country, there's people who either served, know somebody who served, they feel a certain way, but they're forced. It's like this self-censorship that takes place because there's an inordinate amount of pressure from all these centers of influence to get them to shut up. Mm-hmm. And oh, by the way, keep your mouth shut. And that's in my mind, that just didn't fly. So the mission of Knucklehead started with me kind of ranting about things that you can screw up along the way. And then it became, I want to give a voice to each one of those people within an organization to humanize and bring dead leads to life through podcasts for that company. Mm-hmm. So that's what Knucklehead is.
And how long have you been doing it for?
So I started podcasting in 2017.
Okay.
Knucklehead. So we're at like 180 episodes or something like that now.
Yeah.
And then we've produced a bunch. Get it.
We got to fly in the room.
We got a Mike Pence. We got a Mike Pence fly. Yeah. Where's the ocean spray? Yeah. No, but we produce about 15 shows for businesses now.
Okay.
And so we produced a bunch of episodes, thousands and thousands of hours of content.
So you've seen a dramatic rise in not only the amount of podcasts, but the utility of them too as well. I get asked. Well, we were asked regularly, like when we started doing this. I think people really didn't understand why we wanted to do it. Like our wives are like, "What's the point? You guys are just like, you're not doing anything."
Do these people know you very well?
Yeah.
And they still thought that
they
had concerns about your ability to communicate over a podcast, record snippets of it, and then distribute it out to other folks?
I think the way people looked at it initially was like, this kind of a waste of time. Like, how is that gonna? And by waste of time, I mean like, dude, did you snatch that?
No, almost.
Man, you almost had it.
Yeah.
But it was like, how is this gonna put money into the bank? Us doing this thing. Otherwise, my wife looks at things in very black and white.
Sure.
Is your time spent generating revenue for our household, or is it not? Because everything that is not falls into the Rob, you're just playing category.
Sure.
I told you last night how it has benefited us, but you've been at the forefront of this. So how have you seen it shift?
I appreciate that. When I hear people, he almost got it. Yeah, we're going to be fighting this thing the whole show. All right, so when people get trained to do a certain job, there's practical application, and then there's classroom learning, right? Both of them have utility. Mm-hmm. Which one's more important when it comes to the development of
book smart versus like street smarts?
Yeah,
kind of.
Yeah, that's a better way to split the two out. But there's video training, like annual training in the Marine Corps. Remember, like personal identifiable.
I was pre-video. I got out in 2008. So.
Yeah.
Well, like slideshows and everything. Yeah. They're terrible. Like,
I remember the safety
briefs.
Videos. They were so great.
Yeah, they're
on PowerPoint.
And by great, you mean terrible.
Yeah,
right?
terrible. Yeah. Awful. Yeah.
So there's utility in both from a training perspective, but one's kind of a check in the box, and the other one's more of development, right? So whenever you go and start utilizing your training criteria to go and apply it to your job, there's certain things that you actually physically need to go do and screw up to get better at. And then there's some things that are just kind of checks in the box. So from a perception standpoint, we found human behavior really influences a lot of how marketing works. So a podcast, if people think that a podcast is a waste of time, they're severely underestimating that people typically only learn one of three ways: through audio, kinetically, right? So
Right,
they
doing it.
Yeah, kinetic or visually. Those are pretty much the three primary learning methods. So if one of those is a complete waste of time, in my mind, that means you're abandoning 33% of the market that you're trying to go tap to begin with. So why wouldn't a company just go and have that as part of their repertoire? Why wouldn't they, right? So if they, 1996, somebody saying that you had a website in your business, it would be a waste of time, right? I mean, like you go back on YouTube and go find videos of news anchors talking in the 90s about email addresses and, website information, and they're just confused. They're like, why would I need this? I can just go to a phone book.
Yeah.
Or I can send a piece of mail.
Yeah, why would I need to email you? I can just pick up the phone and call you. But I need to stay attached to this cord that's attached to the wall to do so, unless you had this revolutionary technology, otherwise known as like a wireless phone, And now you can touch a piece of glass and get access to information in an instant. And so what was inconceivable at the time now is standard practice. It's a status quo. And so like when you start hearing about how people innovate and iterate, in my mind, it just makes sense for every company on the planet to have a podcast, right? In my opinion, I think that's how things should
Regardless
work.
of like industry?
There's probably exceptions to the rule, like if you really want to get super granular with it. But for all intents and purposes, that's
my word, by the way. It's
okay.
one of them, granular.
Yeah, Matt uses granular, synergy,
molecular, atomic.
Yep. Have you?
No, I haven't used
I don't think you use atomic that much.
Well, all right. Let me ask you this way. So, if you, Rob, are an insurance agent and insurance agent A, and then insurance agent B, you both are equal in terms of what you offer to the marketplace. You offer insurance, and one of you has a podcast or a video series or some type of
which you're a perfect example
multifaceted, omni-channel, pieces of content for folks to consume who you are. Whether they know you or not or want to buy insurance from you or not is off the table. When they came across both of those two, which do you think somebody's going to go with? Just from a reputation and trust standpoint, which of the two do you think somebody's going to go with?
I would think the one who is putting themselves out
what
there.
What do they
and
look
people
like,
are getting
first of all? What do these two...
That's a good question.
Does physical appearance have anything to do with this?
Yeah.
Well,
maybe.
I think they would go with me, and I've seen it happen.
Okay.
Like and I think I know where you're going with this. Like the more you do stuff like this, the more trust is built up with people without you even knowing that it's happening.
Sure.
And so when people make a buying decision, typically they want to buy from people that they know, like, and they trust. And if you can accomplish that ahead of time, before a buying decision is ever made, well, then you're competing at an unfair advantage, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And so I've seen it. We've had people stop us, Matt and I, at the business convention. They're like, you guys are the ones that do the Signal Fire podcast.
The thing.
Not the insurance. It's never that.
It's funny. You're right. I had my insurance booth right next to the Signal Fire booth, and nobody stopped and talked to me about insurance. Everybody stopped and talked to us about this.
Signal Fire, yeah.
About this.
Sure.
So
do a reverse engineer the ROI calculation of not having Signal Fire at that same trade show.
Yeah.
How much less foot traffic would you be interacting
probably
with?
None. And I got new insurance customers
because of that.
Because
so
we're right
in
next
business,
to
you have an opportunity cost to everything.
Yeah.
Right. So the answer to your wife's question to you back in the day is, honey, listen, I understand you don't understand. It's no big deal. But for all intents and purposes, that's the same thing as the news reporters back in the 90s talking about websites and emails. It's the same thing in my mind. And it's not this revolutionary, crazy technology. It's like Dana White in the UFC. Like his old adage is, if people want to stop what they're doing and just go watch a fight. But that's been for forever.
Right.
If the bar that we were at last night, if one of us was walking to the restroom and there was a fight between a couple happening at the bar and there was an argument, altercation back and forth, one of you would have stopped and been like, hey, dude, come here, check this out. Because you want to be that third person in any conversation if there's a little bit of conflict, but typically because there's something there to pay attention to. And if you're selling a widget, a product, it's debatable on whether or not you need a podcast. But if you're running a service-based business and you don't have a podcast or you don't have any type of differentiator that gives people more insight as to why they should know, like, or trust you more, then you're so far behind everybody else that it's almost like the difference between MySpace and Facebook. It's like just because you're first to market doesn't mean you're the best. You could be first, but there always is going to be somebody else that's going to iterate and do it better than you.
I don't know. I'm still a believer that LimeWire is better than Spotify.
LimeWire?
Yeah.
Is it still around? I mean, that put millions of viruses on
They were the
people's
first to market.
computers.
They were the best.
Yeah.
So like for instance, this company,
Cheeky Monkey.
they're here in Wilmington, right?
Yep.
But they're going to get some love
Right.
from the Signifyer folks. So
Right.
if you're in Wilmington and you want to get a fantastic cup of coffee and some really cool stickers, go by this place.
Yeah.
Right. Or go talk to Rob first before you do, so that you can give these people Rob's name and Signifyer can get some love.
Yeah.
So you know what I'm saying?
Yep.
But that's what is missing in terms of how folks are calculating the ROI for their organizations.
So
It's
for people that are sitting on the fence with wanting to do their own podcast,
Yeah.
do you see that the failure to launch, I guess, is that they're worried that they don't have something to talk about?
Most of the time, yeah. So this goes back to a conversation that I had with our buddy Rich, like in 2019.
Okay.
Rich and I were talking about this, and so whenever you're in sales, you have an opportunity to go either stay at the surface level with your customer, or you could take it one step further and go and have additional conversations with more than one stakeholder to be able to substantiate your business case to go with you as a business. So if you're selling a technology to an organization or a service and you go talk to one person, you have like a single support system. But if you go talk to 3 or 4 people, then you have multiple support systems to make your business case much stronger to whomever it is you're going to talk about. All right, or talk to. So when it comes to people who are on the fence, a lot of times they think that their existing business is the only, like, that's the people do business with me because I'm a roofer, or people do business with me because I'm a whatever. Have you talked to them about it? Have you actually interviewed your existing customers? Because if you went back and talked to your existing customers and recorded those conversations, and then transcribe those conversations, and then run analytics against which words are used primarily to describe your service and the way that your service made them feel, that's significant data to be able to orchestrate a production schedule on what to talk about. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And it just so happens that's what we do. We go and we interview your existing customers because they describe you and your service different than what you think that they do.
Now, are you guys
does that make sense?
Are you guys internally are steering those conversations? They're removed from the conversation?
We go and we're like, hey, we're conducting market research on behalf of this because we're
Right.
putting together a show. I'd love to grab 10, 15 minutes of your time to talk to you about this. We're going to record this conversation. If it's okay with you, I'd like to use it as market feedback for us to orchestrate the productive creative for this
So that
show.
data supports how you structure
100%.
the narrative of the podcast.
100%. That's to answer the question of how people who don't feel like they have anything to talk about. Mm-hmm. That's not really the biggest problem. The biggest problem is the people who feel like they've got something to say.
Okay.
And then creating a narrative around, hey, listen, I know you're married to this idea that people absolutely need what you have to say, but have you tried to market test that yet? And so we record a beta episode in most cases and then distribute it out to 10 people who are going to give them honest feedback, similar to what you did. Mm-hmm. And I felt like that's probably the best way to distribute and kind of get some feelers, some good, hey, what'd you think about this?
Yeah.
Most of the time it's odd. Like whenever you have the camera rolling or somebody behind a microphone, they could be the most dynamic person in the absence of these two things. Mm-hmm. But then when you put them on, they clam up, mm-hmm. right? And it's super awkward to go through that. It probably took me, I don't know about you. How long did it take you to get comfortable behind a microphone?
Before we started doing the podcast, I was doing all the video content.
Yeah.
And it's funny that you mentioned that because, I had this idea in my head of what I thought would work. And so Rich let me try it. And basically what I was going to do is I previewed a Keurig cup, a K cup.
Yeah.
I went out and I bought all these unique K-cups from all over the world. And the video would be, I do a 15-second review of this cup of coffee and then I talk about what it was that I wanted to talk about. And we did that maybe for the first 12 videos and then completely abandoned it because looking at the analytics, it's our people aren't really sticking with you to hear what the message is because not a lot of people really care what you think about coffee. And that was true. So I say, to answer your question, I think probably the first month to 2 months, I hated the way I looked. I hated the sound of my voice. I hated absolutely everything that I was saying. And then after I got through those 2 months, then it finally felt like, okay, I'm more comfortable in my own skin.
Yeah.
Like I feel like what I'm saying is sort of aligning. You start to get some of that traction. You start to see people, responding to your content and engaging with it and then turning into customers and getting that attention. So I would say get 2 months. 2 months probably. 2 sessions, and then the actual like putting it on social media part was painful for me.
Oh yeah, I'm sure.
Painful.
It's this window into you that
Yep.
other people. You're like, I've always kept this private.
Yep.
I don't want to let anybody know. We're actually going through this right now with a Marine, phenomenal dude, great, very good at what he does professionally. But he went from Marine to like undercover cop to now he's physically out there in the marketplace helping people buy and sell homes and do investment properties. But he's never put this kind of window into him this way, and so it's a fun transition to see them go through. If you know what I'm saying.
Is he doing well with it?
He's doing well with one of them. He's just starting the other one.
Okay.
So we'll see. Give me about 6 months.
How do you pull that out of people?
That's a great question. All right, so like when I first met my wife, I'm going to tie this back to the answer here. So if you're listening, Jules, I love you. Just be patient. So when we first started dating, I told her what my intent was whenever I first met her. I was like, I want to get married. Like, you're it. I found you, and it was like date 3. So it scared the crap out of her. She's like, who in the hell is this guy?
I'm a little strong there, but
get away from me.
Is she a fellow Texan too?
She is, yeah. Yeah, she grew up in Dallas, just outside of Dallas, Garland, and then now we live in Rockwall. Crazy, like we live where she went to high school. So my entire life I've been Steven. Now all of a sudden I'm like Julian's husband, And I've only been Julian's husband since we moved back. So anyway, but I told her, I go, that's what I would like. That's my intent. And as a way to kind of have her calm down a little bit, I was like, look, I was fine before I met you, and you were fine before you met me. So if that scares you, no big deal.
Yeah.
We're going to be fine. I just wanted to let you know where we were at. And so being honest with people, it's a difficult thing to do sometimes whenever you're in business, which is why I kind of subscribe to the philosophy of you're going to screw up, you're going to make mistakes. So why not be transparent with where you're at and what's happening? And it makes people either feel comfortable or it makes people feel uncomfortable. And those that are more comfortable with that process, then you're supposed to work with. Those that aren't, they're not supposed to work with you.
I'm left speechless here for a second because my story is so similar to that with my wife. And I was getting ready to deploy in 2008. And so I was home and like we were friendly. And I was like, hey, when I get back, like, you're going to be the one. And she was like, no, not at all. That's not going to happen. I wonder if there's something to what you just said there in that, like, being completely honest and transparent with what your objective is. If there isn't, if you don't freak the other person out on the other side of the table, to the point where they're like, oh my gosh, I got to get away. If there's something happening subconsciously where they're like, okay, well, let's see where it goes. Maybe this will happen the way that he or she says that it's going to be. So that honesty piece of it, I think is important, but also too, I had a moment as we were talking, like calling back to when you and I jumped on a Zoom and did an episode for your podcast. And like, I laid out the very stupid thing that I did when I wrote the letter to the commandant when I was in boot camp, or when I would get to new corporations and I would just be like, I've arrived. I'm your savior. I'm here to fix everything that ails this company. Otherwise, why wouldn't you have hired me? And then having to backtrack and like apologize for that, those real knucklehead moments.
Yep.
But I think I feel like it's made me a little bit better as a person to look back and go, okay, yeah, you were dumb. You owned up to it, and then you moved on and went on with your life. Am I summarizing kind of like the ethos of what it is, why it is that you are doing what it is that you're doing, why you're pushing so hard for people to do exactly what it is that we're doing right now?
Yeah, I think so. I think that there's some truth to what you're talking about. People, not everybody's going to be striving to be the best version of themselves, right? But every organization on the planet in some way, shape, or form is looking to perform. And they are looking for that optimal level of performance. And they're comprised of people who just need some support and or help to let them know, hey, listen, we're gonna help you get through this process. It's gonna be uncomfortable at first. Like, it's kind of going back to the original point. You were fine before I met you. I'm fine before you met me. And just letting them know, listen, we're gonna get through this. There's going to be this evergreen, library of content for folks to Netflix out on you, and it will bring dead leads to life when folks that you don't know start to consume it, right? Like, you didn't know what show was your favorite show on Netflix before you started watching it, but you got a suggestion from somebody, or at least you came across it, and then all of a sudden it's like you binge it, like you want to watch it. That's how human behavior works. So why would a business not want to have that in their Rolodex?
Yeah, it's funny.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, it's funny you say that, because like you'll get a new follower or a new connection or something, and the next thing you know, they'll have liked 8 of your videos, 100%. And I never put that together where it's like, oh, I didn't know about this. Now I'm binge watching your stuff, and all of a sudden you're in my funnel.
Yep.
Yeah,
it's crazy. Well, what's interesting about that is part of what you said was absolutely true as to why. Another reason, which is probably equally as important, is I've screwed up so many times. I've messed up relationships. I've messed up in business. I've thought that I've got this. Watch out. Let's go. It's on me now, and it not gone anywhere in terms of whatever the mission is or the project, and it hasn't gone the way that I originally anticipated. That I think that the more people trust themselves to take those risks and go through that same journey that I have, they're going to be able to improve. And it's crazy the risk that you take in the beginning, because I was a rigid asshole for so many years. I'm not saying that I'm not now. I'm just maybe a little bit more refined.
Nice about it.
Yeah. So it's gone, but it's been all those mistakes and screw ups and falling flat on the face and just getting back up that have helped the organization be what it is. Now it provides opportunities for people to have full-time careers in what it is that we're doing, which is fantastic. I suck at editing audio. I suck at editing video, but I did it for 50 episodes myself. Every single thing. My first 7 episodes, I uploaded to SoundCloud. I didn't even have my own RSS feed, and I had a podcast, right? Or I see people talk about their podcast, and they don't know where podcast came from, or what an RSS feed is, or why does it matter? In most cases, it really doesn't. It's just about doing it and then learning through the process. So where I was going with that was simply to say that for people to misrepresent digitally as an influencer, that people just need to blindly trust them and, oh, by the way, part with your hard-earned dollars and cents to buy my course. That I want to take a baseball bat up to that idea and just watch it die slowly on the sidewalk. You understand what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. Like, I cannot stand people who are like, I learned this thing and now I'm going to package it into a little course, and you need to trust me to, use your credit card rewards to do whatever. It's like, time out. Not only are people desperate out there, but people are interested in being better. And if you can help them get a little bit better every day, then that's going to be a good thing. And I had a painful lesson with a podcast client who we didn't have a clearly defined objective as to what we were looking to accomplish. And we used the distribution method of paying for downloads in our business whenever we did that. And it completely violated the trust of the person who trusted us to do that for their organization. They didn't have an intent on increasing their downloads. What we were doing is we were running experiments on how this is actually going to affect their ranking, subsequently what it's going to do to their engagement. All of that could have been avoided had I just communicated better on the front end. So now, every time we have a new podcast client, it's like, okay, time out. What is the objective of what you're looking to accomplish here? Because otherwise, it's going to put you and me in a bad situation if I start using tactics or deployment tactics for distribution that don't line up with what your objective is. So that's why I like this whole course building, hawking, grifting thing that exists. It infuriates me just as much as not being honest.
Yeah. So what
it's worth.
Yeah, absolutely. So what are some of those like clearly defined objectives? Because it's clear in just the few minutes that we've been talking about this, and I knew this to be true about you all along, that you know a lot more about this space than these two knuckleheads, Matthew and I. I think we told you last night, like, we're just like, let's just do it, and then let's see where it goes. And then we'll refine, we'll build, we'll try something new, we'll learn new technologies, we'll just, so help. if we were your client, for the people that are going to be watching and listening, like what advice can you offer for somebody that's like, yeah, I want to do it. I've committed to doing it. I'm comfortable with talking or seeing myself on camera, but then I don't know how the hell to define my objective in doing it. I know that it's the right thing to do, but I just don't really know how to say what it is that I want to accomplish from it.
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. So even just that question in itself, it's what's baked into that question. And I'm going to repeat back to you what you said. And so help me define what the 2 to 3 things are that I need to be doing to get traction. Is that pretty much what your question is? Okay. Most of the time, those 2 to 3 things for any net new organization who doesn't have a new digital asset, which I call it podcast. That's what it is. It's a digital asset. Assets are meant to create leverage to get you to move forward. So if that digital asset doesn't exist currently and you don't know how to define what it is, let's start with one. What would you like to do? Would you like to gain a listener who can trust you more to come to your business? And then when you start making things a little bit more simple in terms of defining what one thing is instead of 2 to 3, it becomes much more simple. And then once you've done that, then you've essentially created what we call kind of get some wins. You create these small victories that will eventually add up over time to much larger wins. A good buddy of mine who helped me when I first got into podcasting. So you could also go get a podcast course. It's called Pod Spark for a guy named Greg Clunas. You can go, and if you just want to be a hobby podcaster, go get his course. Pay $850 or whatever it is. That's going to be money well spent, because when you land your first sponsor that's going to offset, $3,000 over 60 days, by my math, that's a 250% return on your money if you go buy his course and do what he says. But he's not going to work with you, right? He's not going to. He might, but he's not going to come in and help you get your the Shure mic, or the why isn't your XLR matching up to your USB interface, or do you need a DSLR camera, or do you need a 1080p webcam to make sure that you can edit the video down and find that piece of micro content? He's going to go through and he's going to help you do that, so you can start paying attention to those things. So the answer is it's a lot more than 2 or 3 things, but it's really starting with one. And then if you're going to get into a situation where you're behind the mic, I love just having one. And I got this from Brian Fanzo. So Brian Fanzo at Military Influencer Conference in 2019, he said, grab a sticky note and write down 2 or 3 things that you want to talk about over the next 35 minutes. And if you have a multi-host show, if you have 2 to 3 things and you'd have 2 to 3 things, and then your guest has 2 to 3 things, you're talking about accomplishing 6 or 7 very major things over that 45 minutes. It gets hard to do. So you have to pare it down and make it much more simple. So you can get by doing an in-depth conversation with less, as opposed to trying to do a lot with a little bit. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So I come from a traditional media background,
okay,
right? Last night we were hanging out with some radio people and some ad agencies, and the way we would always go sell what we had was hey, we have an audience of 500,000 people that consume this media regularly. This is how much we think it is valued for. Would you like to participate and sell your product or your service to the audience? Podcasting, I guess, is built on the same kind of business model. But why would somebody choose to sponsor? And how does that interaction go? Is it somebody like Matt and I just hustling and saying, hey, this is our show, this is what we talk about, this is how many people listen to it, give us $5,000, and we'll push your product? Does it work like that, or is it people will reach out to you and be like, oh, hey, I can see all this data and all these analytics, I want you to sell our product or service for us?
That's a good question. So in sales, we have a way to describe that. It's demand fulfillment or demand generation. So most of podcasts right now is in a phase where it's in demand generation. So you have to go out and hustle and get and do, just because it's not necessarily, I don't even think it's gotten to a point where it's matured enough to be on par with traditional media. Now, if some podcasters are out there and they want to throw their keyboard at me, so be it. The reality is when you can go and demand hundreds of thousands of dollars for your audience or access to your audience as a radio broadcaster or radio advertiser, like Intercom, they own a bunch of stations all throughout the country, and then subsequently, take it into a different language and apply it to a different market or a different international market. It's different. My question to those people who want to look at things that way is, well, do you actually own that audience? As a podcaster, it's yours. As a podcast network, you can essentially aggregate the defined audio or audience reach across all of your shows, and then bring that back to be a network, have a network sponsor or a newsletter sponsor or a social media post sponsor or a merch sponsor, and you can start to really get creative on how you want to dissect that. But in my opinion, I think radio is fantastic, and podcasters could learn a lot from the way traditional media distributes their content or creates revenue through distribution.
Yeah, you made a good point there. Like you could spend more money on radio or TV. You still don't own or control any of the content, any of the programming.
By the way, if you do that over a social media platform, can social media censor you?
I think so.
Yeah. If they don't like what you have to say, can they throttle your content?
Yeah.
If we have too many guns.
Yeah. We have a client that we do work for, and I have a friend who built a huge Instagram following, 500,000 followers on Instagram. He sells T-shirts, pro-American, patriotic T-shirts, and he's been like thrice now taken down off Instagram and Facebook because he'll put some political posts out there.
It'll happen.
So they've just his business just got turned off like that because that's where they would go to market their products.
Unless you have your own distribution channel, like a podcast, in my opinion.
Yeah,
that's a way to insulate yourself at least from it for a while.
Okay.
It's the last bastion of free
Freedom.
speech that exists in this digital media space. If you
I
ask
don't know
me.
what's going on with Trump media.
Oh yeah, I know. Yeah, Trump put out that he's got his own social media platform.
Oh,
who knows?
Wow.
And investors are like clawing at the opportunity to
I'm
pour
sure.
money into it.
I'm sure.
Well, I mean, it is what it is.
Yeah.
So I mean, there's well, okay, sorry.
No, I was going to say it's America. At least he used to be America.
Yeah.
He's trying to keep it America.
Doing his very best. How do you go from getting that first listener to getting 10,000?
Man, that's a great question. If your goal was to get 10,000, then you have to iteratively give people reasons to want to pay attention to you.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, man.
Oh yeah, you got it.
Yeah.
You did it.
Dead fly. Sorry.
T minus what? 45 minutes.
Yeah.
Thank God.
Sorry
you
for
got
everybody that is listening in their AirPods because their ears just
got
exploded.
Yeah.
You get
Nice
the championship belt for the show.
Absolutely.
Matt's the
I
winner
see
today.
The NWO.
Yep.
All right. So to answer your question, if your goal is to get 10,000, so how many people live in Wilmington? Total?
250,000 ballpark.
So then you just reverse engineer the process.
Yeah.
I mean, enough people care about those things, and you have to give them reasons to care. I think for what y'all are doing, what caught my attention the most was how you were highlighting small business owners here in the local area. And it wasn't just local. There was one guy, it was like a health shop. No, it was a health food shop, and they just moved in from
Oh yeah, Don
Cleveland.
Verity, yeah.
Okay. Is he here? Or
Yeah,
is
he
Their
lives
headquarters
here,
is
yeah,
here.
but
Okay,
they've got
headquarters.
locations across the entire United States, like 70 different locations now
Well,
that they're up to.
If you hear the conviction in his voice about the risks that he took and the success that he's experiencing, he wasn't doing what he's doing now. And then if he was going to be doing those same things whenever he first started his first company, they're completely different types of actions and activities that those business owners have to do. Like if you hear him even talk about the success that he had, and y'all gave him an opportunity to talk about the beginning and then what he's doing now. And so if you really analyze what people are doing, getting listeners isn't necessarily a difficult thing. You just give people a reason to talk about what they want to talk about. And typically it's the things that they're passionate about. Most of the time, what we believe at Knucklehead is you give them an opportunity to talk about the things that they've screwed up, because there's so much conviction in learning that happens in that, as opposed to what they've done awesome.
Yeah.
So that's all. That's why we lead with what you screw up.
Should the first approach really be focused on your geographical setting?
Yeah, I think so.
Really?
I do. In my opinion, I think that that's the best way to do it. Or, something that you have in common with your first set of listeners. Like my first set of listeners I was telling a story about a screw up that I had made whenever I was in the Marine Corps. I was in boot camp, and y'all appreciate this. So we were standing in line. Drill instructors.
You were
were
in the
over
real
here.
boot camp, though.
Yeah.
San Diego.
Yeah,
Right.
absolutely.
Easy,
that one,
boys. Easy.
All right, here we're gonna start like a little mini civil war here. I love
Sunset Strip.
it. Well, you got drill instructors over here, and you're all standing in line, and you have your weapon, right? But I had to pee so bad, And I didn't know what to do. You're still like disoriented.
Let it go,
like,
man.
what do I do?
Let it go.
I ran out of line. And see, y'all are laughing because you know how stupid that is.
Yeah.
And I didn't know where to go. I didn't know like how to like.
Just
Where am I
running
going to
around in
go?
circles.
I run into the barracks, and a drill instructor caught me.
Yeah.
Took my weapon away, but I got to go pee in the toilet, so it was good. Yeah, I got relieved there. I paid for it later.
Yeah.
And I ran back to get in line, and oh my God, it was so painful to just retell that entire experience. But my first sets of listeners were guys that could relate to that.
Mm-hmm.
But if I'm trying to go after my 10,000 listeners, some soccer mom's not going to give about that.
Yeah.
Right. So I had to go like to where my audience was first. I had to talk about those things first.
Yeah.
And I never intended whatsoever with Knucklehead Podcast to be a creative way to go use a creative way to do biz dev for Knucklehead Media Group.
Yeah.
It took me probably 90 episodes to really understand that strategy on going and profiling people that I wanted to do business with, asking them to come onto the podcast. If they came onto the podcast, then all that was another pre-qualification for them to be a client for Knucklehead Media Group.
And we just recently started kind of experiencing like progression with that.
Yeah.
with some of our
100%.
guests.
It's a great strategy. And publicly traded multi-billion-dollar multinational corporations that we do business with are now wanting to use that in conjunction with their traditional pound the phones, emails, and traditional kind of sales activities.
I think it's just such it's a soft way to get the first part of a relationship started.
Of course it is.
Like, hey, and I'm glad you're giving me some validation, because sometimes you sit up at night and you're like, are we doing this the right way? Like, we wanted it to be very community driven.
Yeah.
I wasn't
community?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have guessed that at all.
I wasn't worried about like, hey, I got to get Jocko on the show because we want a million people, a million hits on
And it won't
YouTube.
happen if he came.
Yeah.
It wouldn't happen.
It wouldn't. Yeah, it wouldn't. Probably because they already have so much out there. There's what they have to say has very much been said. But I wanted us to be able to meet, connect with, and build relationships with leaders that are right here in Wilmington, North Carolina.
Yeah.
And we haven't. We're coming up on our 1 year anniversary.
Congratulations,
We haven't run out
by the
of.
way.
Thank you.
That's awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you, bro.
Yeah, because I want to
awesome.
ask you about Pod Fade, because that's a real thing too as well next. But I wanted us just to be able to say there's a lot of really great things happening right here in Wilmington, North Carolina.
100%.
And
Having never been here before
Yeah.
you invited me out was like,
Yeah.
I can say there's a lot of really cool things that are happening here.
I love it.
So
I love it. And so I guess what my point is all of that is like, don't get worried about if you're listening to this. Don't worry about 100 people listening to it, or 10,000 or 1 million people listening to it. If it's true to what you want to do, if you want to, like, we just want to showcase ambitious leaders and let them tell their stories about where they began, where they screwed up, where they hit a home run, and where they're at now and where they're going in the future. There's a lot of that right there. So no matter what your topic is, stick to it.
Yeah.
And work through it. But there is, and this is what's leading me to my question, there is a point where people go, I can't do this anymore. Like, I've done 8 episodes. I think the data we saw that was like most people will stop after 8 episodes.
Most people will.
Yeah. Why do you think that is?
That's a great question. I don't think that there's anything wrong with that, to be honest with you.
Quitting at 8?
Yeah, quitting at 8. We, as a prereq, most of the time, I believe 10 is the right number. Mm-hmm. My director of content strategy believes it's 3. So if somebody does not have a digital asset, most of the time, my suggestion is to stack content, have 10 episodes at the ready before you release one, and you populate your first, you could populate your first dump with 11 episodes. So you have 10 at the ready, and then you have your one that you did last week. And then if you record each week, then you can slow drip that content out once a week. Mm-hmm. Right? So that's what I think it is. My director of content strategy thinks it's 3. It's fine. It's probably somewhere in the middle. But anyway, my point in saying that is it's fine. McDonald's had a podcast series for 3 episodes. McDonald's had a 3 podcast episode because they wanted to investigate there was a breach of health, so people were getting sick in one part of the country. And so they had a 3 podcast series talking about what happened, how they were dealing with that problem, and then what they were going to do to solve it going forward. That's fine. again, it goes back to you got to begin with the end in mind. What is it that your objective is of this particular show, and then reverse engineer the process. TV series, they have a finite, like a shelf life. The Chappelle Show did how many ever series it did, and then it never came back.
Yep.
So it happens. I think it's perfectly acceptable, totally fine. I don't think that there's anything wrong with it at all. But what ends up happening, though, in most cases, I don't mean to interrupt you,
no, you're fine.
but is you have people that, like if you look at Barstool Sports, talked a little bit about it last night. It started as a newsletter, kind of betting blog, sports blog, and it's grown to be this multi-billion-dollar, like a casino, Penn National bottom 2 years ago, I think.
Yeah.
And now they just crank money. It's like a cash register, not just for Portnoy, for so many other people that are now part of his team. So if your organization sells, you're an airplane manufacturer who does like the little widgets on because we've talked to this company in Fort Worth about a podcast before. They're like, well, why would we build a podcast if our product is solely just building these little widgets for airplanes? It's like, well, do you feel like there's going to be new people that you need to come back into your company? Like what HR recruiting arm? How are you going to go attract new talent? How are you going to go, vet new vendors? How are you going to go and like, what's your process for all of those things? And can you bake it into the narrative of a show? And once you've accomplished that goal, then it has to be either something else or maybe you backfill that with a different host. Black Rifle Coffee's changed the name of their podcast several times. It used to be Black Hearted, and then it was like something else, Launch Code, right? And then so every time you change your name of what it is that you want to do, it'll change the narrative of the show. That's fine. I think it happens.
So would you recommend then, like, if you get to a point, because Rich, I just saw Rich posted he's done doing Leadership Locker. I think he did like 200 episodes. Yep. Now he's doing the NFTs thing and looking at other ideas.
Yep.
You think that's a good practice to be like, okay, I'm putting an end on this one.
Yep.
And now we're changing directions and we're going to go in a different lane.
Well, let me answer it this way. So a couple episodes ago, you talked about a couple businesses that you own, right? Mm-hmm. So if you're going to go talk to an entrepreneur about starting your first business, would you trust somebody who's only done one or somebody who's got, how many do you have?
4, I think, or 5 on paper now, yeah.
Okay, so if you have 5 different businesses, you're probably going to be more apt to talk to somebody who has more than 5, right? Mm-hmm. So there's merit to going and talking to somebody who's done more. I think it's perfectly acceptable for you to have more than one show, unless you're one show on a network, and that network is essentially selling the diversification of all the topics.
Right.
So then you can double down and focus on what it is that you do and specialize.
Yeah.
So that's probably the exception to the rule.
Matt, be thinking about what Signal Fire Radio 2.0 is going to look like.
Oh, it's freaking me out.
I get so excited about seeing the century mark, like having 100 episodes or 200 episodes or 300 episodes. And I think
Joe Rogan's had how many?
Like 1,000 something, 1,700. Yeah.
And how many are
another one's got
how many of them are MMA shows?
Yeah.
Like he's got his own MMA show.
Yeah.
Now, in addition to what he's doing. So I'm not saying everybody needs to be Joe Rogan. I didn't mean to interrupt you. It's just,
No.
I think that people can get wrapped around the axle that'll stop them from just moving forward. When you're in the creative phase, the worst thing that you can do is put limitations around that. See that all the way through the end, even if you ultimately decide not to do something with it. But don't, like if we were going to do a creative session right now, and like what does Signal Fire 2.0 means, you can't say no to anything for like the next 15 minutes, and we're just going to throw out ideas, and then they'll end up on a whiteboard, and then you iterate against what works and what doesn't. I like that idea.
That simplified it for me.
That simplified it for me.
Yeah.
Especially if we can write it in crayon. If we can put it all in crayon, then we're 100% onto something.
Yep.
Is there any correlation between the number of podcasts that you do and success? Does consistency equal? Okay, go ahead.
In my opinion, yeah.
Yeah.
I've missed like every podcast that I do for Knucklehead. I'm like, and we got new episodes coming at you every Tuesday, and there's months where I haven't released a new episode, but I say it all the time. So if it could be the first time somebody hears it, and they're like, oh wow, you release a new episode every Tuesday, and then they go to the episodes and they see that there's 160 or whatever, or 180 that are there, and they go back and they can listen to when I was consistently doing it every Tuesday. Now I'm running the business. I'm doing a bunch of things that doesn't allow me the opportunity to always do that. So when it comes to guest curation, you can augment your guest curation strategy by going and talking to the interview valets of the world, or there's Podmatch that's out there. There's a bunch of different technologies that you can use to go and find people who just want to come onto your show and talk to your people. So that's what I like about this.
I hope you're taking notes, Josh, on all these little things that we know. Oh yeah,
No,
it's all
we're-
recorded.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
recorded. We
Yeah.
just go back and
Audio
listen
and
to our
video.
own show
Yeah.
about all these hacks to make it a little bit better,
The
find a
cool-
little more people.
For the way that you work, I think that Chartable is probably a really cool analytics tool for you to use. And then there's something called Chartable for brands. It's expensive, but they use Clearbit verified IAB downloads. So they'll go and they'll use the IP address for folks' cell phones, and they'll cross-reference that for business IP addresses. So you'll see who in the local community from a business standpoint and how many people at that business are actually paying attention to your show.
Very interesting.
So it's cool. You can run those analytics to say, listen, we can start going, all right, this is instead of it just being a brand expansion and awareness channel, we can start doubling down into how we are going to embed a conversion metric or a conversion tactic in that distribution to start making it an intent channel. So there's a difference there, which is phenomenal. And then Chris Walker he just Refined Labs I want to say they're in New York, but Chris Walker, their CEO, phenomenal guy. Look him up on LinkedIn, and he's very engaging in terms of how he'll talk to you, and he'll give you like a no kidding strategy in terms of what it is. It's going to be expensive, but he'll talk with you in terms of how to actually execute, or if it's time to just hang it up and go on to the next thing.
Yeah. But money well spent, in your opinion, to do those kinds of things?
Just given his experience with other marketing, it's not always the easiest thing to hear, and which is why he doesn't play nicely all the time with other executives. But he does well for what he does.
Sure. But back to the very beginning, like honesty is if you're not going to sell it straight, I want to be told exactly what it is that I need to hear, not what I want to hear. So if I appreciate that on the other side of people, if they're just like, well, dude, you're screwing up here. Yeah. And this is where you can fix it, and this is how you can fix it.
Yeah. And people also want to tell you like what they like about you too.
Yeah.
I don't want to disappoint you and be like, no, this is terrible. The reality is I don't know what I don't have the solve for that person's business. But the reason why they have the problem to begin with is because they also don't have the solve. But if we come together, that I believe in that mastermind principle that us coming together is going to create a new set of solutions that don't exist until we have a conversation.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It does. It absolutely does. Man, I love it. Anything else that we haven't covered that we need to add?
We haven't even talked about the beach. Like I landed yesterday and I was like, how's it not snowing? This is North Carolina. And
it's a perfect day out today.
Yeah, it's
perfect day out today.
And my Uber driver or Lyft driver was like, it doesn't snow in Wilmington.
No.
What are you talking about? And then I come
Once
to find
every
out,
like 5 or 6 years, we'll get a snow. But I mean, average low is probably mid 30s at night in like February, and the daily high is probably mid upper 50s.
I'm blown away. It's
today's
really
a boat
nice
day.
here.
Today's a boat day. It's 78. It's sunny.
What time's your flight?
I have to be at the airport probably 5.
That's a good question. We got time. We got time. Josh wants in. You want to get out on the boat, Josh? Is that? All right. Well, I guess that means we got to wrap the episode then.
I appreciate you having me.
Absolutely,
And
man.
So this is the call to action. So if you're listening to,
Matt gets
he
the
got
bell.
the fly.
Matt gets the bell
If
for
you're
the day.
listening to Signal Fire radio or podcast, whichever one you happen to be listening to, and you haven't subscribed to the show and left a review, you're wrong. So just go and write a review about Rob's hair, or Matt's
mustache,
phenomenal mustache. How bad did your ears hurt whenever he smashed the fly earlier, or whether or not you agree? That would be my suggestion. Go and subscribe to their show, and then go back and listen to some of their other episodes. They've had Navy SEALs on. They've had folks that have started restaurants and grown these massive revenue generating engines that are out there on the show, and you can learn a lot from people listening that are right here in Wilmington. And if you're a business leader in Wilmington and you haven't been on their show yet, reach out to how can people reach out to you?
Matt at signalfire.media.
There you go.
Could not be easier to get in touch with us, or just hit us on LinkedIn. I mean, we're there every day anyways, so
there you go. That's the answer.
Hell yeah, man. That's a good sign off right there.
Yeah, no kidding. That's like the most efficient wrap up ever.
I love it. Thank you so much for coming. If people want to get in touch with you, what's the best way to do it?
Just go to knucklehead.agency.
Knucklehead.agency.
Or you look at Knucklehead Media Group on LinkedIn.
And don't be beta, right?
Don't be
you
a
guys
beta
still
about the
sticking
process.
with don't be
Don't
beta.
be a beta about the process.
I think that's one of the best, like, slug lines, slogan, whatever you want to call it.
I'll get you a shirt.
Have you seen the Don't Be Beta shirts?
Yeah, there's just
I love it. It just speaks to me, man. It's like, be bold, be courageous.
Yeah.
Like,
you're gonna screw up.
Yeah.
So,
and don't worry about screwing up. If you're gonna fail fast. Get yourself up and move on.
Yep.
And absolutely move on. I love it. That's gonna do it for this episode of Signal Fire Radio. Until next week, go out, feed your mind, strengthen your body, enrich your spirit, and grow your tribe, and go be a signal fire in your community. We will talk to you next Monday. Hey, we hope you enjoyed this episode of Signal Fire Radio. Click the links to connect with us on social media. Also, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell on this video. And for more in-depth content, check us out on Patreon. We'll talk to you guys next week.